Okay, thank you for inviting me to speak to you this morning. You might be wondering why the vast government guy to talk to a room full of people involved in construction. But what I hope to show this morning is that the discussions you're having aren't unique to yourselves. It's actually something that I'm probably all right. I think in the honour of the pictures around the room, I'll try and project my voice. If you can't hear me at the back, put your hand up and I'll grab a mic. But I do tend to wander when I speak, so I don't like to go behind the podium. But what I want to show you this morning is that the discussions you're having aren't unique to yourselves. In fact, it's a discussion that's happening everywhere. And in fact, in fact, there was a guy from Gardner who would be the world leading analytical company and research company, speaking in Dublin last spring, and his opening statement was literally "go digital or go home." Now that's a slight exaggeration, and he was promoting his book, Digital the Core. But the point he was making was that digital is no longer peripatetic to our business lives. It's not something that we add on at the end or we put at the boundary. It should underpin everything now that we do, and it should focus our thinking on how we deliver business services. And Mark used the example of many organisations who are no longer with us because they didn't understand how rapidly the world is changing. And we all know the example of Kodak, for example, who actually invented digital photography, but then decided that it interfered with their key business, which was selling film. And examples like Blockbuster, who thought that people would always want to come in to their shop on a Friday night, rent the video or DVD, buy the popcorn and so on. And companies like that are no longer with us. So it pervades every aspect of our life. It will continue to, and it's great to see that this is a conversation you're having and you're now acting on. Perhaps if you look at this, we might have been entitled to say to Mark Ruscino, thank you very much, but you can go home now. Because Ireland, as you know, the economy is doing very, very well. And in fact, you can't read the narrative there, it doesn't matter. But the article on the left, which just came out a couple of weeks ago, said it's no longer a secret that the Irish economy is doing very well. In the middle is an RTE from a couple of weeks ago. Our online economy is booming. And over on the right is a thing called the DESI Index, which is produced annually by the European Community. And it looks at a country's overall digital health by assessing things like how easy is it to get access to good connectivity, how skilled are all the people in the country, not just the employees, how much is the internet used, how does business use the internet, how is business integrating digital, and so on. And as you can see, Ireland now is in 6th place. So we're up there with the leaders of Europe. So on the face of it, things are good, it's a good story. But actually, there are storm clouds in the horizon, and I don't want to sound like my Minister Pascal Donoghue here, but you know, we don't know what impact Brexit is going to have on the country. And another concern is obviously what impact Trump is going to have on the country. That's a concern probably of everyone. But you know, what he's talking about doing in terms of trade reform and so on, how will that impact on Ireland? And the other thing we're very proud of in Ireland is we're seen as a world hub in the whole digital domain. And you think of the number of world-class companies who've chosen to put their European headquarters in Ireland, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Microsofts, etc. It feels like we're in a good place to be. But yet what's happening in Asia, which is the article on the right, is very, very scary, and very, very scary for the whole of Europe. And when you pick below the surface, there's things in the country which need also to be addressed. We have a twin track or a dual speed approach to digital. And although we've a lot of SMEs doing very, very well using digital, as that graphic shows, which was produced just before Christmas, 1 in 5 SMEs in the country don't use digital in any shape or form. And that's a risk. That's a risk to them. It's a risk to employment and so on. So it wouldn't be a good time for anybody in the room to say, but we've always done construction well. There's a huge demand for construction. We don't need to change, because actually everyone needs to change. Everyone needs to be working out how to embrace this new age of digital, this new industrial revolution, or whatever term you want to put to it. I said before, the Europeans were very concerned, and this is Andrus Ansip, who was the former Prime Minister of Estonia. And if you know the story about Estonia effectively being established as a digital country, because the Russians took away all their physical assets when they left, then you'll know that he will be biased in this area. But the reason why he was asked to do this job in Europe, which is leading the concept of a digital single market, is that Europe is very, very concerned about the capability the Asians have to decimate our employment and our wealth. And so Ansip believes 2 things. One is this concept of digital removing the physical borders that slow up trade between countries, has an opportunity to grow the overall revenue of Europe by 415 billion a year. That's his first thesis. His second one is the government actually have to lead in this area, because countries that are really good at digital have really good e-government approaches, and governments that don't tend to take seriously e-government for the delivery of their own services tend to lead to countries that are in the laggard phase by the EU statistics or any other benchmarks that you would choose to look at. This is something a lot of government across the world are taking very seriously. In fact, Scott Bryson is a senior government figure in Canada, and he said in a speech just before Christmas, we cannot continue being a blockbuster government serving a Netflix citizenry. And I was actually asked to give a talk not long after Christmas, and I looked around the room and I suddenly thought, there's not a lot of you actually know who Blockbuster is. Now, I'm sure there's a few of you in the room who don't, but I did mention them earlier, the idea of the whole DVD industry being completely decimated by the concept of Netflix and now Amazon and so on. So we have the same issue in government, and that's what Bryson's picking up on. But of course, government is different. And the difference between government and everyone else is, first of all, we don't pick and choose our customers. And in fact, a lot of our main customers are people who don't do digital. A stat that came out last year was that 94% of people in welfare have never carried out a transaction of any kind. Now, that doesn't mean to say you're not always on their phone and the train and so on, but that's quite different from actually using your phone or your tablet for business reasons. And so that's an issue in the country. And it means that government have to adopt their services to meet the needs of those people, as well as people like yourselves who are probably using computers, tablets, phones for transactions a lot of the time. Second thing is, we have a lot of stakeholders. So anything the government does will immediately have someone criticising it. And you only have to look at the 2040 plan to see how quickly the media wheeled out those who didn't like aspects of it, and that became the story. So it was never about what are the positive things it's going to do, it was always about the negativity. And that's difficult when you're doing some of the things that I'm going to talk about this morning. We've loads of legacy. So unlike Estonia, we can't afford to just stop all our welfare systems and revenue systems and so on and say, we're going to start again. And if we did that, the Comptroller and Auditor General would be very interested in why we're writing off systems early. So we've got to adapt, we've got to move forward organically. People losing their jobs is always our problem. An interesting stat is that between revenue and welfare alone, we send out about 100 million pieces of ordinary mail a year. Now, if we stop that, it would be the final nail in the coffin of InPost. So government have always got to be worried that they're in an ecosystem, and some of the decisions they make will have ramifications right the way across the piece, and they need to be aware of that, and they need to plan for it. So it's hard in government to actually define what success looks like when you're looking purely at digital. But nonetheless, we did produce an e-government strategy, and the e-government strategy very much reflects the things that I've said about the European dimension, but also the principles of good e-government, for example, like the Canadian government talked about. And I want to talk about a few of these today because I think they do relate to some of the discussions that you're having and will be having later this morning and throughout this year. The first two are to develop a digital services gateway and maintain a digital programme overseen by our e-government minister. Well, why are we doing that? Well, the main principle is we've got to have similar looks and feels for how we're doing things. Two departments doing something shouldn't be done in a completely different way. If you're the consumer of those services, it should look and feel the same regardless of which transaction you're doing, because you don't care which department or which minister is responsible for which service. All you want to do is renew your passport, get your driving licence, or whatever it is, as quickly as possible. So having the same look and feel, having an easy way to access services is very important. And I noticed one of your key things here is standards. And this is what's behind all this. Standards means that everything looks the same and starts to become intuitive, and people can adapt quite easily from taking one service to taking another service. This is the actual digital services gateway, and the interesting thing is, first of all, it's very theme-based. So instead of the old model, we had to know where to go for your driving licence renewal. It's up there, front and centre. What is it you want to do with government? You just click, you go straight the way through. And that was launched before Christmas, a soft launch, and it's starting to generate a lot of traction and will be used for more and more things as this year progresses. So the next thing, the whole idea of a state electronic identifier, and then to do the same for business and location. Again, why are we doing this? Because if we want people to choose to use the digital portal to go on and access services, we obviously want them to be able to just identify themselves once and get access to their information. We can pre-populate forms and all of that sort of thing. But to do that, we absolutely have to be certain that the person in the other end of the line who we can't see is who they say they are. So the whole concept of electronic identification is really, really important. And if you've read the Irish Times or the Independent and so on, you'll have seen all of these articles about the public service card. It's not about the public service card. It's about having an absolute certain route to giving people in the state who want one an electronic identifier, and that electronic identifier is as safe as it possibly can be. Next is data sharing, and again this plays very closely to some of the things that you've been talking about. The model that people like me grew up in developing was that every single business system had its own database. So in other words, if you were a business or a citizen who used 10 systems, your record would be held at least 10 times, probably using 10 completely different software products, probably designed in 10 totally different ways, and that information would never be shared. So if you change your address, it might be that you remember to change it in 4 systems, and 6 systems still send stuff to your old address. We need to move away from that, and part of the way we need to move away is stop these little proliferation of databases and move to the concept of single registers, or indeed even using products like blockchain, where we simplify the process of how data is held by government, the stewardship of that data, which makes it safer from a GDPR perspective, and also makes it easier for you to find out what data does the government hold about me and what's it doing with it. So this whole data sharing capability, the strategy and the legislation that underpins it is very, very important. And there's the legislation that hopefully will be passed this year. So the next area is open data, because what we're starting to see is that other people can use government data to add value to what's being done. So to carry out research that government hasn't done itself, or develop services that government hasn't developed itself. And our open data portal, which I encourage you to look at, it's actually very, very easy to follow, some very interesting case studies and so on it. But it's part of Ireland being recognised in the EC as the best country in terms of developing open data initiatives. And part of the reason for that is we have two agencies that are absolutely brilliant in this area, the Central Statistics Office and Ordnance Survey Ireland. And the quality of open data that they're now producing through this portal is absolutely fantastic. And others are doing a good job too. So finally, the back office. And if we're going to go to a concept where you have a single front door to all government digital services, and we're joining up the data to make it as easy for you as possible, then the old ways of having everyone having their own computer rooms, their own servers, and so on, don't fit that model. And so a lot of this initiative is to go to simplification of infrastructure as well, and host the data in whether it's government cloud or a proper public cloud, host it as simply as possible and making sure that data sharing is physically possible. And the capability to do that and the governance obviously over it to make sure we do it in a safe way. This is a debate that's actually happening in the country at the moment, because there's the likes of Amazon who will go to ministers and say, this will be so much more simple if you just put yourself in the cloud. But when you're in government, the cloud debate's slightly more complicated than that, because we host some of the most sensitive data in the state. And so it's all about the ability to control what's happening in your data. It's about the scale. So if we join together what we're doing in government, we can actually do stuff as cheaply as Amazon can do it for us. It's about, do you have the people to actually manage your data and so on well? And then it's about, do you actually understand the risks of putting it out in the public cloud? And it's not just the data security risks, but it's things like contractual risks around lock-in and so on. So it's understanding all of those areas. And the right model for us will be a hybrid model, where our most sensitive data is held on-premise in the government cloud, and the simple stuff is put out to public cloud where it's cheapest to run. We're actually developing a state data centre. There's a building conference, but at Silbridge, where the blue dot is, we have plans now with OPW to develop a state data centre there, which will open in the early part of 2020. There's an aerial map of it, and that's the back western where the agriculture labs are. So it's a perfect location to put a data centre. Now, it's only a small data centre. It's about 600 racks and an overall power consumption of about 1 megawatt. But still, it's a very efficient means to host the state's data. And I have good contacts with an organisation called Eureka, which was established by the EU to advise states on how to build data centres with as much energy efficiency and green awareness as possible. And they're working with us in the project. And the ambition up front and central is to have the greenest state data centre in Europe. Finally then, governance is obviously key, but at the bottom of that, and it resonates again with what David was talking about at the start, having the capability to do this. And regardless of what business we're in, you cannot rely on others to do all of this stuff for you. You have to understand a lot of it yourselves. You have to develop talent who can either do the work or let the contracts do the procurements for others to do the work and monitor to make sure it's done well. And so a lot of the stuff that we're doing in professionalisation, we're sharing across the civil service, because that's not unique to us. And in fact, it's not unique to us in this room. You know, understanding why you need to do this, having career development structures if people want to work in your areas with grades, job titles and so on, looking at different ways to do recruitment. So for us now, it's not just about grads, because we can't compete in the grad market with the likes of Microsoft and Facebook. We're now looking at ICT apprenticeship schemes. We're now looking at retraining and upskilling schemes and so on. Strengthen development and accrediting our people wherever possible. Obviously recognition and reward, and making sure we have more coordinated management, that we're using the people where their skills are most needed. I was thinking about how this applies to yourselves, and I was talking to Alan earlier on, and I was saying that the reason why a lot of these projects that I've talked about are moving forward quite quickly is the government really understands why they need to be done. And usually why do things need to be done? It's for one of two reasons. One is there's a really strong value proposition. In other words, it's going to save you money or earn you money. Or the other one is there's actually a burning platform. There's a risk that you need to address. And I guess when you're talking about digital, both apply. There's real savings that can be made through digital, through business process automation, through robotics and so on. But as I said in the first slide, if you don't do digital, are you actually going to be here in 5 years or 10 years? And some of the things that actually are driving your market is absolutely right. The demand for construction is so great in this country that if you can do construction faster through BIM and other technologies, that's only to everybody's benefit. And of course, I mentioned the whole area of energy efficiency in terms of our own little data center. But what you're capable of doing with BIM in terms of energy efficiency is fantastic and can only be applauded by the state and supported by the state. So I commend you on this work. I commend you on your roadmap, and I wish you every success on your journey. And I think the thing is about any journey is, it's great to talk about it, but it's even better to do it. And I love Warren Buffett's quote, "Someone's sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago." And that's absolutely right. You're planting trees, or you're planning to plant trees this year, which the country will benefit from, and probably only really see the benefits in 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years. But that doesn't mean it's the right thing for you to be having this conversation now. So I wish you every luck this morning. I hope this has helped at least position your thinking, if not enlighten it. And it's been great to meet you all this morning. So thank you.